Now, let me turn to corruption. As was mentioned, I think, by Dr. Gopwa, there really is no nation that is free from corruption. However, what many of us are concerned about is what is called grand corruption, also known as Technocracy. This is the abuse of public office for personal gain. And we've seen some autocratic leaders on my continent and your continent and in Europe and elsewhere use their position of authority, using their positions often as head of state to corrupt the financial position of their own countries for their own personal benefit and for the benefit of their own families. Only recently there was the situation in Angola, not far from where I'm sitting, where the former president dos Santos stole hundreds of millions of US dollars worth of monies and goods and hid them in various places in Europe, and his daughter, Mr. Santos, is now the major beneficiary of that corruption. So there is this grand corruption, kleptocracy by leaders. I'm embarrassed and I regret to say that our own former president, Jacob Zuma, also got involved with what is called in South Africa state capture. And unfortunately, there's a connection there too, because the three of the people who got involved with him were three Indian nationals who became South African citizens, the Gupta brothers, who are now hiding out in the United Arab Emirates. Now, the problem, of course, with many kleptocrats is that they also, because of their position in government, are able to control and infiltrate the police and the prosecution service, and sometimes even the courts. And that makes it difficult to get at them. The victims of grand corruption, the victims of kleptocracy, are the poor people of the countries concerned. It's from them that the monies are being stolen. Their starvation in many cases is a result of this kleptocracy and corruption. It's been estimated that developing countries in the world lose 10 times more to corruption than they receive in foreign aid, 10 times more than the foreign aid. It is estimated that the amounts plundered a year exceed $1 trillion US. So we're talking about huge amounts of money and huge damage being done to millions of innocent people. The former High Commissioner for Human Rights of the United Nations, my fellow South African and a good friend, Navi Pillay, said in 2013, when she was the High Commissioner, I quote, she said, "Corruption kills. The money stolen through corruption every year is enough to feed the world's hungry 80 times over. Corruption denies them their right to food, and in some cases, their right to life." And one last quote from the New York Times correspondent, Nicholas Kristof, who's done a great deal for human rights in many countries. He said, grand corruption also has fatal consequences in other ways. In Sierra Leone, 1/3 of the funds allocated to combat Ebola in 2014 could not be accounted for, although some of those funds, he wrote, were found in the bank accounts of health officials administering the program. So you had unbelievably callous people, administrators, who were using the money that were meant to save the lives of people who had contracted Ebola, were putting the money instead into their own private bank accounts. In 2016, more than 40 countries met in London for an anti-corruption summit. They unanimously endorsed the global declaration against corruption that commits each of them to the proposition that the corrupt should be pursued and punished. In 2003, the United Nations passed a convention called the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, UNCAC. 187 countries have now pledged under UNCAC to enact laws criminalizing corruption and to enforce them even against their own leaders. But 187 countries came together. Why? Because the members of UNCAC, the 187 members, were really doing little to carry out in their own countries what they were obliged to do by the international convention. And the participating governments who met in London in 2018 they committed themselves to exploring innovative solutions to combat corruption. One of the results has been the United Nations Secretary General and the head of other United Nations bodies, the head of the Social and Economic Council, got together and have set up a high-level investigation into ways of avoiding corruption. It's known by its acronym FACTIV. And it goes further. In April, in the middle of April of next year, 2021, the United Nations General Assembly is holding a special session on corruption, to have a two-day session dealing with ways of stopping corruption. One of the ways some of us, I have a number of colleagues in the United States, in South Africa, in Colombia, in Peru, in Canada, we are intent on trying to push the idea of setting up a new international anti-corruption court. It will also work on the system of complementarity, so that if somebody from my country commits corruption, the international court would not have jurisdiction unless the South African courts were not doing anything about it. So it's a court like the International Criminal Court. It's a court of last resort. An international anti-corruption court would have one huge advantage over the International Criminal Court. And that is that people who commit corruption, kleptocrats, what do they do with the money that they steal? They don't put it in a local bank. Obviously not. That's the last thing they're going to do. They send it abroad. They send it to investment banks in Switzerland, in Singapore, and other so-called safe havens. In some of the islands, also in the United Arab Republic, people with money to launder, stolen funds, invest the monies and hide it away in these countries. And the importance of an international anti-corruption court is there's no reason why those countries shouldn't join. The United Arab Republic, the Swiss government, the Singaporean government are not themselves corrupt. They are not stealing. They are the recipients. Their banks and their institutions are the recipients of the ill-gotten gains. And if countries like that joined in an international anti-corruption court, the court would have jurisdiction to go to those countries, to freeze the ill-gotten gains, to recover the ill-gotten gains. And that should be an attraction to many large countries across the world where stolen monies end up. And of course, I don't exclude London and New York and other large financial capitals around the world. There's only one way to stop crime, and I'm sure you will agree with me. The only way to stop crime is to have efficient policing. If would-be criminals fear that they're going to get caught and brought to court and punished, they are less likely to commit their crimes. I'm not naive, and I don't believe that the most efficient criminal justice system, the most efficient police force in the world, will stop all crime. Obviously not. There are always going to be people who think they know better. They think they're sufficiently clever to get away with it. But the more efficient, the lower the crime rate. If you look around the world, you'll find that the crime rate is higher in countries where there's an inefficient police force, and the crime rate will be lower where there is an efficient police force. If one can rely on the police to investigate crime efficiently, that is the best way of reducing the crime rate in your country or my country or any other country. The greater incentive for powerful nations to join is precisely what I've said, that it will be a way, an international criminal court would be a means of enabling victims in a country to benefit from the efforts of an international anti-corruption court. In concluding, let me say that if we are going to have a better and more peaceful world, then International Criminal Court can play a crucial role. It cannot be right, it's not moral, and it's not just that people who commit war crimes, war criminals, should get away with it. They shouldn't be given impunity. War criminals should be aware, no matter what their position is in a country, they should be aware that there is a court that is willing and able and will have the support of the global community in investigating their war crimes and bringing them to justice. So that is my brief survey of where we are at present and my plea for an international anti-corruption court. Thank you for your attention.